and welcome to another episode of Time with Tom. My name is Tom Ruesink. I'm with Cornerstone Information Systems. I head up product and marketing for them. And these different webisodes that we do periodically are just really conversations with thought leaders in the industry about what's going on today in the travel industry. And today I'm very happy to be joined by an old friend, or at least a friend for a long time. I don't want to call you old, Scott. I'm here with Scott Gillespie, who I always have said, if you had a Mount Rushmore of travel consultants, Scott would definitely be on that Mount Rushmore. So welcome to Time with Tom, Scott. How are you doing today?
Great. Good to be here, Tom. Appreciate you inviting me onto the show. Thank you.
I thank you for joining me here. So, one of the things that is on everybody's mind these days is the recovery and what does travel look like post-COVID or coming out of COVID, and how do you see the landscape there?
Yeah. So let's be clear, no one really knows. I haven't seen any authoritative study. So this is conjecture stitched together with a bit of business logic. How's that? Where I come out on this is I'm skeptical, deeply skeptical, that business travel will ever recover to the level we saw in 2019. If you think of travel as a share of GDP, right? So the big constraints that I think are just really hard, going to be really hard to overcome is essentially two things. The convenience, kind of the proven convenience, not necessarily super effectiveness, but the acceptability of the video alternative, the virtual meetings that we've all been forced to have. It's really just, it's shown a lot of people that many meetings that otherwise would have required travel can be done. Again, maybe not as effectively, but they can be done in person because we had to. So a lot of evidence points to the acceptability of video over travel. The other thing that I think, the other factor that's really going to grow more so over time, over the next few years, is the concern regarding climate. Now, the Europeans have been way ahead of the US on this issue, but it's catching up. I think a lot of American companies are recognizing that this is an important issue. And I think that too is going to put a real constraint over people being allowed to travel. So what it's going to come down to is which trips are really justifiable and which ones are not. And that's a tough question. I will say, I'll just editorialize here that a simple and I think a remarkably stupid approach to resolving that question is to promote or allow external travel at the cost of denying internal travel. So all those companies out there that are going to say, well, we'll just, if it's client facing, if it's revenue potential travel, then dead yes. And if it's all internal travel, then, no. That's just really short-sighted. And I hope companies will put more thought into, the merits of meeting in person, because there are many good reasons to meet in person that don't necessarily involve revenue.
Absolutely. And it's kind of like, in a lot of times you hear companies put a travel ban in, but then it's really not a travel ban. What does it mean when, a lot of times it just means you have to get somebody's approval, so to speak, to travel. And as far as being able to discern what is a justifiable trip, that's always been difficult for companies. I know, you've shared with me that you're working on different ways to help companies in that regard. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about how a company can really discern what is a necessary trip in a way that has some sort of, objectivity?
Yeah. And, again, let's admit that these things do come down to management judgment. It's, because there's no precise formula, I don't think there's a standardized test that we can create, but I think we can help management become more informed about the benefits of meeting in person. And so what appeals to me on that question are, a few dimensions about the meeting. I mean, first, let's understand that we only travel because there was a meeting we want to be a part of. So let's start with the importance of that meeting. The more important that meeting, probably the more justifiable the trip is. But also, what's the dynamic of the meeting? What's kind of the verb, if you will? What's going to be done in the meeting? Two examples. If it's meant to be informative and to kind of share information, kind of one-way communication, updates or what have you, that's not very interpersonally dynamically rich, right? It's like, right, doesn't really need to be in person as much. But if the meeting is meant to do something like persuade or defend or negotiate or create, those are, I mean, you can just see those are more interpersonally rich opportunities. And so you could expect better things to happen if you have that type of meeting in person. So those are a couple of the dimensions that that I think are really important. And there's, there are others in terms of how important is it to build trust or, kind of renew your relationship with people. That should play a part too. So I think there are a few questions that can be asked to kind of score the merits of, having the meeting done in person compared to doing it virtually.
And you're doing some work on in that area as well. I know you've done some work in groundbreaking areas like trip friction and some of those, but this is more about the value of the trip or being able to at least pre-calculate, is a trip necessary, demand management.
Yeah, it is a demand management question for sure, because what's going to happen is travel budgets are going to be a lot smaller, and that just means there are going to be more people asking to travel than will be allowed to travel. So companies are going to need, I think, a better way to manage the demand for all that travel, and so they should have a starting point for more objectively assessing the merits of one trip over another. I really don't like the idea of trying to calculate, especially pre-trip ROI. I think that's a fool's errand. And I don't really like, in fact, I intensely don't like the idea of calculating post-trip travel ROI. I mean, there's just a lot of complexity there that I don't think we have the answers for. But I do like the idea of companies understanding that we're traveling to help support specific goals. And that's a really interesting way to think about how we can transform managing travel, is by doing a much better job of linking each of our trips to to which one main goal does it most support. I've talked a little bit about this on LinkedIn. I call it goal-based travel management. I think it's a remarkably timely way to think about how we should be managing travel going forward.
Now, Scott, you have or coming up with a specific tool to help companies with that. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that tool itself or what it's called?
Yeah, thanks. I am prototyping a travel demand management tool, and I think that's a new category. It's very different from pre-trip approval, because by the time you get to pre-trip approval, somebody's already booked a trip, and now they're asking for approval that it's okay. So this tool is really designed at the very top of the funnel when somebody just begins to think about, oh, I might want to take a trip somewhere for business reasons. So we've designed a very simple website. Go to the website, answer a few questions about the trip, answer a few questions about the meeting you'd like to have, and the tool will give an unbiased, objective rating as to how justifiable that trip is. So it's kind of on a scale of 1 to 4. It's either somewhere between not justifiable to justifiable, or maybe justifiable or probably not justifiable, but it'll tell you what we think of the merits of traveling to make that meeting in person. So kind of proof of concept. It works pretty well. We're refining it as we speak. We're trying to make it easier and faster for road warriors to store some answers to some common questions. But I think it will serve the purpose of what I think companies will need, and that is a quick, easy way to get a starting point on assessing whether or not a trip is justified. Oh, and where can you find this? You can find this at www.project-gather.com.
Sounds good. I definitely look forward to seeing what you come up with in that arena to help companies, Scott. And like I said, I've always thought many of the things you've come up with have been just very much groundbreaking as far as, and I appreciate you, as you always say on your profile, nudging the industry forward bit by bit. Now, before I can let you go on a time with Tom, we have to ask you at least one fun question. So I'm going to ask you about, have you had any interesting brushes with fame? You've obviously been a world traveler and so forth. But what's the most interesting brush with fame that you've had?
Yeah, I can't say I've had any close encounters with fame myself. Way back in the day, in college days, in our fraternity, we had Tom Wilson come through a couple of years behind me. Tom Wilson, to those that don't know him, he's an excellent stand-up comedian, and he made his first big splash in the movies in the movie Back to the Future, and he played Biff, the bully, if you will. All right. And pretty true to form. What you saw in that film was a lot of what I saw of him in the fraternity for that year or two that he was with us. So
he seems
that might be the closest.
Larger than life, yeah.
A terrific guy.
Excellent. So, well, thank you, Scott, for joining us today. I wish you all the best with your endeavors in this arena, and appreciate you adding little insight to us and helping educate our audience. So thank you, Scott. Take care.
Good to spend time with Tom, as always. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.